Welcome back to the deep dive. Before we even get started today, I just got to ask you a massive favor.
Yeah, please do.
If you enjoy the work we do here, taking these really dense, complex, and let's face it, highly controversial topics and distilling them down into pure signal, just smash that like button and hit subscribe.
Definitely hit the bell, too.
Exactly. Hit the bell. It helps the algorithm find us. And trust me, after you hear what we're tackling today, you are absolutely going to want to be notified for the next one.
Oh, yeah. Today is, it's heavy. We aren't just skimming the surface of some standard political book today.
No, not at all.
We're looking at a text that is actively trying to deprogram the reader.
Right. We are doing a complete deep dive into this ultra-long, incisive, and honestly fascinating ebook. It's called Leftist Fever Swamp, Capturing Gullible Minds with Subjective Resentment, Jealousy, and Hate.
It's a mouthful of a title.
It's a huge mouthful, yeah, by Conrad Riker. And I know the title sounds aggressive, right? But the content itself, actually this incredibly structured historical argument.
Yeah, it really reads less like a rant and more like a declaration of war against the modern cultural narrative.
It's a manifesto.
It is entirely a manifesto.
Right.
Riker isn't pulling punches here. He's essentially written a manual for understanding the history of our institutions before they were, in his view, completely captured by feminists and Marxists.
And look, we're going to give you the key insights today, right? The God-tier logic, as Riker calls it. But if you're in that audience, if you're looking for the full arsenal of arguments, you need to go to Amazon Kindle or Google Playbooks right now and buy this book.
You really do, because we can't cover every footnote in 20 minutes.
No way. So open a new tab, grab the ebook, and let's just get right into it.
Do it.
So let's start with the absolute bedrock of his argument. Riker talks right off the bat about the gynocentric fallacy.
Yes.
Which is a big term. What are we actually looking at when he says that?
So the central thesis here is that Western civilization is currently suffering from a very specific delusion. Riker argues we've adopted this worldview where male strength is demonized. But at the very same time, male resources are completely harvested to support a system that fundamentally despises them.
It's a trap, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He calls it a fever swamp of subjective feelings. And his whole mission in the book is to guide men out of that swamp and back to logos.
Logos? That's a Greek term, right?
Right. It means logic, reason, objective reality. It's about looking at the world as it actually is, not as we just feel it should be.
So it's objective truth versus subjective emotion.
Precisely. Riker is setting up this epic battle between the two.
Okay, so the premise is that men are living in this incredibly hostile environment that gaslights them into thinking that they're the problem while simultaneously relying on them to keep the lights on.
Keep the lights on, fix the roads, fight the wars, yeah.
And to illustrate this, he uses a really stark historical comparison. The HMS Birkenhead versus the Costa Concordia.
Oh, this is a fascinating comparison of, he calls them operating systems.
Operating systems. Okay, explain that.
So go all the way back to 1852. The HMS Birkenhead is a British troop ship, and it hits a rock off the coast of South Africa.
Okay.
It's sinking fast, the water is freezing, it's pitch black, and it's totally shark infested.
Terrible situation.
And there aren't enough lifeboats. Now, there were soldiers on board, but also families, women, children.
And usually in a disaster like that, you'd expect mass panic. Just everyone scrambling over each other to survive.
Right, human nature. But here, the soldiers don't riot. They don't scramble at all. They perform what became known as the Birkenhead drill.
Which is?
They stand in formation on the deck. Rigid attention as the ship literally breaks apart underneath them. They stand still to drown so that the women and children can get on the lifeboat safely.
Wow. It chills you just thinking about it. That absolute discipline, the sacrifice.
It's intense. And Riker argues that was the old operating system of civilization, chivalry.
The strong sacrifice themselves for the weak.
Exactly. But then he contrasts that with the Costa Concordia disaster in 2012. Modern era. A luxury cruise ship sinks off the coast of Italy. What happened there?
The captain tripped and fell into a lifeboat, didn't he?
He claimed he tripped and fell into a lifeboat, yeah. He fled the ship. It was absolute chaos. Women and children were pushed aside by grown men.
So it's completely inverted.
Yes. Riker's point is that the social contract has fundamentally broken. Men used to offer that ultimate protection, like those soldiers on the Birkenhead, in exchange for respect and authority in society.
Right, there was a trade-off.
But in the modern era, Riker argues that feminism came in and demanded all the authority without accepting any of the liability.
So his logic is, if I don't get the respect, why should I offer the sacrifice?
Exactly. It's the shift from women and children first to every man for himself because the reciprocal deal is just gone.
That is a brutal way to look at it, but functionally, I mean, it makes sense.
It really does when you lay it out like that. And this leads right into one of the strongest data points in the entire manifesto, which is this concept of the glass cellar.
Yeah, because we always hear about the glass ceiling, women can't get to the CEO suite or whatever.
Right, the top 1% of jobs.
But Riker flips that entirely to look at the bottom.
He really does. He points directly to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. He notes that men comprise roughly 93% of workplace fatalities.
93%, that is just a staggering number.
It is, and it highlights his argument about dirty, dangerous jobs. We're not talking about office disputes over microaggressions or the air conditioning being too cold.
Right.
We're talking about sewers, oil rigs, coal mines, high voltage line repair, deep sea fishing.
The jobs that keep society from collapsing.
Exactly. These are the jobs that maintain the very infrastructure of civilization. Riker argues that the women who are constantly criticizing the patriarchy are almost always doing so from climate-controlled offices that are powered by the very men they claim are oppressing them.
That's the invisible infrastructure argument. Men are the ones keeping the water running and the internet on, but they're treated as entirely disposable.
Yes, and he calls it the theory of male disposability. He relies heavily on evolutionary psychology here.
How so?
Well, he argues that society essentially views men as success objects. You are valued exclusively for your utility, what you can provide, your taxes, your physical labor. But society has almost zero regard for your actual survival.
Whereas women have an intrinsic value.
That's the claim. In this worldview, a woman has value just by existing. She is considered a human being. A man only has value if he is doing something.
Human doing versus human being.
Right. And if a man fails to provide utility, he's just discarded.
Which brings us perfectly to the economic engine of this whole system. Riker calls it the tax farm. And this part is definitely going to make some people angry.
Oh, without a doubt.
But he claims the math supports it. He talks about net tax contribution. Can you break that down for us?
This is crucial to what he calls the parasitic contract. Riker breaks down fiscal data across Western nations to argue that men pay the vast majority of net taxes.
Okay, let's define net in this context so we're crystal clear for the listener.
That means if you take what a specific person pays into the system in taxes versus what they consume in government services.
So we're talking welfare, healthcare, subsidies, housing assistance.
Exactly. Everything the state pays out. Riker argues that men are the net contributors. Over their lifetimes, they put in vastly more than they take out.
And women?
Women, statistically speaking, are net negative contributors. As an entire demographic group, they consume more in state-funded services than they ever pay in taxes.
So essentially the argument here is that men are working their lives away to fund a state that then just redistributes that wealth directly to women.
Yes. And Riker goes a step further with the terminology. He calls the state a surrogate husband. He refers to this whole dynamic as bureaucratic polygamy.
Bureaucratic polygamy, that is a wild term. Let's unpack that.
Well, the idea is that the modern welfare state has effectively replaced the father and the husband. In the past, a woman relied on a specific man, her husband, for resources and protection.
Right, the traditional family unit.
But now she relies on the state. The state provides the housing, the food stamps, the security. But where does the state actually get its money?
From taxing the men who are out working those dangerous jobs.
Precisely. So men are forced, via the threat of prison for tax evasion, to subsidize the lifestyles of women who don't need to respect them, marry them, or frankly even like them.
Riker argues you are essentially subsidizing the strong, independent lifestyle of people who actively despise you.
Yes, it's a massive mandatory wealth transfer scheme. And he ties this back to the voting system, which is fascinating. He looks at the 19th Amendment.
Right, the right to vote.
He views the suffragette movement not as this grand narrative of liberation, but as a strategic acquisition of resources without taking on any responsibility. He references the White Feather Campaign during World War I.
Oh, I remember this from a history class. Women handing out white feathers to men who were in civilian clothes to publicly call them cowards.
Exactly. Women who legally could not be drafted actively shamed men into going to the trenches to die. Riker's syllogism here is simple. Equality implies equal liability.
Right.
If you have the vote, which is the authority to decide if the country goes to war, you should have the draft, which is the liability of actually fighting that war.
But since women have the vote but not the draft, the system is fundamentally rigged. It favors female safety at the direct expense of male life.
That's his exact argument. It completely reframes the historical narrative of liberation.
It really does. Now, if the economic system is the engine of all this, the legal system is the guardrail that keeps you trapped inside it. Section 3 of the book is called Legal Labyrinth, and Riker dubs it no-fault slavery.
This is where he dissects the family court system, and it is a brutal takedown. He pinpoints the signing of no-fault divorce legislation, which was signed by Ronald Reagan when he was governor of California, ironically enough, as the absolute destruction of the marriage contract.
Because before that legislation, you had to have an actual legal reason to break the contract, right? Like adultery, abuse, abandonment.
Correct, you needed fault. In basic contract law, if I contract you to build a house, and halfway through I just decide, you know what, I'm not happy, I'm firing you, I still have to pay you. I breached the contract.
You can't just walk away free and clear.
But Riker points out that marriage is now the only contract in Western jurisprudence where one party can unilaterally break it for literally any reason.
I'm just not happy, or I need to find myself.
Right on board.
Right.
And not only can they break it, but they are financially rewarded for doing so, with alimony and assets, while the other party, usually the man, is severely penalized.
He calls it a cash-out mechanism.
Yes. A state-sponsored cash-out mechanism for hypergamy. And if you think the divorce part is bad, his analysis of child support enforcement is where it gets genuinely terrifying. He essentially argues that we have reinvented debtors' prisons exclusively for men.
But debtors' prisons are illegal. You can't go to jail for owing a debt in the West anymore.
You can if it's child support. Riker highlights a legal concept called imputed income. And this is totally critical to understand if you want to know how the trap actually works.
Explain that to the listener who hasn't had the misfortune of being in family court.
Let's say you were a welder making $80,000 a year. The economy tanks, you get laid off, or maybe you get a back injury. The only job you can physically find is working at a local coffee shop making $30,000.
Okay, a huge drop in income.
The court can look at you and say, no, you have the potential to make $80,000. We are imputing that previous income to you. And they set your monthly payments based on the $80,000 number.
But you don't have that money. You physically do not possess it.
It doesn't matter to the court. And when you inevitably can't pay, that's considered contempt of court. And you go straight to jail. Riker argues you're being taxed on imaginary, theoretical money, and the penalty is your literal freedom.
That is insane.
He also links this to the Duluth model of domestic violence policing, which, he argues, basically trains law enforcement to presume male guilt automatically in any domestic dispute, regardless of who actually called the police or who has the injuries.
That creates a terrifying lack of an escape valve for men. And Riker points out the ultimate double standard in a chapter called The Abortion Atrocity. But I want to clarify, he's not arguing about pro-life or pro-choice in the traditional religious things here, is he?
No, not at all.
Yep.
He's arguing purely about legal symmetry. He talks about the concept of financial abortion, or sometimes it's called paper abortion. Riker states that right now, women have total reproductive choice. They can choose abortion, adoption, or raising the child.
Right, 3 distinct options.
But men have zero choice the moment conception occurs.
So if she decides to keep it, he pays. Period. End of story.
He calls it financial conscription. If a woman unilaterally decides to keep the child, the man is drafted into financial servitude for 18 years, completely regardless of his consent to become a parent.
Right.
Riker argues that if the concept of my body, my choice applies to women, then my wallet, my choice absolutely must apply to men. Without that legal opt-out, he argues men are basically second-class citizens in terms of reproductive rights.
It's the total lack of an opt-out that creates the slavery aspect he's talking about. Now, moving on from the courts. If the legal system is the cage, the education system is how they groom you to willingly walk into it. Let's talk about Chapter 7, Indoctrination Camp.
This is his deep dive into the war on boys. Riker argues that the modern public school environment is pathologically hostile to basic male nature. He uses the Pop-Tart pistol incident as the perfect example of this institutional hysteria.
Oh man, I remember this vaguely. It was a kid who'd shoot his pastry into a gun shape. Right?
Yes, exactly. A 7-year-old boy was suspended from school because he bit a breakfast pastry into an L shape and pointed it and said, bang.
That is just, it's absurd.
Riker cites this not just as a funny, ridiculous anecdote, but as hard proof that the system views natural male play, aggression, and imagination as an active threat.
Because the system wants compliance.
Right. It wants compliance, stillness, and silence, which are traits that tend to come much more naturally to young girls, but not to young boys.
And because the boys naturally can't sit still in a desk for 7 hours in a row, what do? We diagnose them.
The drugging of boyhood. Riker claims that the massive explosion of ADHD diagnoses is effectively a medical tool to chemically geld young boys.
Geld them, wow.
Yeah, they take these high-energy, kinetic young males who historically would be outside exploring, hunting, farming, building, and they sedate them with amphetamines just to make them manageable for female teachers in a confined classroom.
It's creating a whole generation of men who are chemically disconnected from their own natural drive.
Exactly. And this connects directly to the deeper philosophical battle in the book. This isn't just about bad policies. It's a fundamental clash of worldviews. Riker calls it the death of logos and the rise of solipsism.
We touched on logos earlier, logic and reason, objective truth. But what exactly is solipsism in this specific context?
Solipsism is the philosophical belief that the self is the only reality that can be known to exist. Riker connects this heavily to a concept called standpoint epistemology.
Okay, that is a $10 academic word right there. Break that down for us.
So epistemology is basically the study of how we know what is true. Standpoint epistemology is this modern academic idea that your personal identity and your subjective feelings actually determine what is objectively true.
So my truth totally replaces the truth.
Yes. If I feel unsafe around you, then you are inherently dangerous, even if you did absolutely nothing wrong.
Ah, so if I feel oppressed, I am oppressed, completely regardless of the facts on the ground.
Precisely. Riker calls this a satanic inversion of reality. He points to the Believe All Women movement as the absolute peak of this cultural solipsism.
Where hard evidence is just completely discarded in favor of the narrative.
Exactly. And he highlights the Depp versus Heard trial as this massive, pivotal cultural moment.
That trial was a huge turning point. Why does he think it mattered so much in the grand scheme?
Because it was a highly public, televised collision between logos and solipsism. Riker argues it was the exact moment where objective evidence, the audio recordings, the police data, the timelines, finally clash with the subjective narrative of victimhood in a totally public forum.
And the narrative completely collapsed.
It shattered. It proved to the mainstream that blindly believing without evidence is incredibly dangerous.
It really showed that you can't gaslight the whole world forever when the receipts are right there. But okay, so we understand the trap now. We see the mechanics of it. How does a man actually navigate it? Section 5 gets into evolutionary psychology and what Riker boldly calls the shit test.
Yes. This is where Riker draws heavily on Arthur Schopenhauer. He frames the shit test not just as some shallow dating advice, but as a deep biological mechanism that women instinctively use to test male strength and frame.
It's a probe.
It's an instinctive probe. The underlying question is always, are you strong enough to handle my chaos?
And most modern men completely fail this, right? Because they try to use logic to answer a purely emotional test.
Correct. You cannot logic your way out of an emotional storm. Riker defines this as frame control. He says the alpha, and he uses that term specifically to mean a leader who controls his own reality creates the frame. The beta lives inside her reality.
So if you apologize when you know you haven't done anything wrong just to keep the peace.
You've entered her frame, you've submitted, you've lost.
So what's the practical technique he offers? He talks about agree and amplify. Give the listener an example of how that works in real time.
It's all about using humor and absurdity. Let's say a woman is testing you and calls you toxic or arrogant. A defensive, weak man says, no, I'm not, I'm a nice guy.
Right, which just proves her point.
Exactly. But agree and amplify means you say, oh, absolutely. I'm practically radioactive. I actually glow in the dark.
You just lean all the way into it.
You completely reject the premise of her insult by making it ridiculous. It shows you are totally unaffected emotionally. It proves your frame is much stronger than her criticism.
That's a powerful tool. And we also have to touch on hypergamy. He brings up the 80-20 rule.
The Pareto principle applied directly to dating. He brings in data from dating apps like Tinder, showing that the top 20% of men get the vast majority of female attention in swipes.
It's a hugely skewed market.
Riker argues that the whole incel phenomenon isn't some pathology of evil men. It's just a statistical inevitability of a totally rigged, deregulated sexual market. When you remove the traditional social guardrails of monogamy, hypergamy runs wild. Women naturally all chase the top tier of men, and the majority of average men are left with nothing.
So we've painted a pretty bleak picture here today. The legal system is a trap, the public schools are drugging boys, the economy is just a tax farm to subsidize people who hate you, And the dating market is statistically rigged. It sounds hopeless. But Riker doesn't just complain, he actually offers a blueprint out. He calls it the masculine resurrection.
Yes, the core strategy here is starving the beast. Riker advocates strongly for going Galt.
That's a direct reference to Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged, right?
It is. In that novel, the productive people of the world simply go on strike. They stop holding up the sky and they disappear. Riker says men must systematically withdraw their labor, their physical protection, and their taxes from a society that openly hates them.
Stop building the house for the people who are trying to kick you out of it.
Exactly. He calls for building parallel institutions. You cannot reform the current institutions. They are way too far gone. So economically, he points to Bitcoin and crypto.
Why specifically crypto for this audience?
Because of decentralized finance. It's about getting your hard-earned money out of the fiat tax farm, where it can be inflated away by the government or seized by a family court judge. If your assets are sovereign and untouchable, you are sovereign.
Makes sense. He also talks heavily about the gig economy.
Right, but not just as a weekend side hustle to make extra cash. He views it as a necessary way to avoid corporate HR departments.
Ah, the HR departments.
Riker views HR as the primary enforcers of diversity, equity, and inclusion mandates that systematically discriminate against straight men. If you work for yourself in the gig economy, you can't be fired for toxic masculinity. You become fundamentally uncancelable.
And what about for the kids? How do you protect the next generation?
Homeschooling. Riker is absolutely adamant about this point. You must remove your sons from the public education system to protect their minds from the indoctrination ink that we discussed earlier.
Yeah.
You have to be the one to teach them history, logic, and stoicism.
Stoicism.
Yeah.
That is the final philosophical weapon he mentions, memento mori.
Remember, you will die. Riker argues that if you truly accept your own mortality, you become completely immune to modern social shaming. Cancel culture relies entirely on your fear of social exile, your fear of the tribe casting you out into the cold.
Right, if you don't fear the exile, they have absolutely no leverage over you.
Exactly. If you practice negative visualization, realizing you can survive just fine without their approval, realizing that eventually we are all just dust anyway, they lose all their power over you.
It's about becoming the immovable object in the rushing river.
The final thought of the book is incredibly powerful. Men are the infrastructure. Riker says, quote, "You are the host, they are the parasite." It sounds harsh, but his point is purely logistical.
Explain that.
If men simply withdraw their consent, their competence, and their physical protection, the entire genocentric fantasy collapses immediately. The lights literally go out, the water stops running, the trucks stop moving food to the cities. The system relies entirely on the very people it constantly demonizes.
That is a lot to process. But it connects so many dots that usually just get ignored in mainstream discourse.
Yeah.
This book isn't just a rant. It's a systematic deconstruction of the world we're actually living in.
It truly is a blueprint for a fortress of reason in a sea of chaos. Whether you agree with every single point or not, the logic is rigorous. The data regarding the glass cellar and the tax farm is undeniable, and you really need to understand it to navigate the modern world safely.
Absolutely. Look, we've given you the high-level overview today, but you need the full manual.
Yeah.
There is so much more in there on rhetorical destruction and specific legal strategies that we just couldn't fit in. Go to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books right now and buy Leftist Fever Swamp, capturing gullible minds with subjective resentment, jealousy, and hate. It's ultra long, it's incisive, and honestly, it's a fascinating read.
And for the unfiltered analysis that keeps coming out, you need to follow the author directly.
That's right. Make sure you follow @Conrad Riker on Substack. That is where the real deep dives happen, completely unfiltered and raw.
As Riker challenges us at the very end of the manifesto, the betrayal was the spark. Now, become the fire.
Become the fire. I love that.
Yeah.
A perfect thought to leave you with. Think about how you are fueling the system and what would happen if you stopped. All right, smash that like button, subscribe if you haven't, and we'll see you on the next deep dive. Stay stoic, gentlemen.